Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Statesman Soundwave with your host, Raghav Khosla. Recently, Stevenson's girls golf team placed second in the state. That got us thinking, what makes a successful golfer? Is golf a sport of the mind more than it is a physical sport? We wanted to take a deep dive into the mental side of golf and sports in general, so my co-host Malini and I spoke with one of Stevenson's most decorated golfers, as well as a reputable sports psychologist based in Chicago, to get further insight into this topic. We had great conversations with both of them, so let's get right into it. Here's our first conversation with Emily Duan, a senior golfer at Stevenson. So, do you think golf is more of a physical or a mental game?
I think it's definitely a mental game. I think there's a quote out there that's like golf is 80% mental, 20% physical. I could be completely making those percentages, but I think it holds true because you're out there for like 5 to 6 hours. And even though you're playing with others, you're mainly just alone. And it's really dependent on how your mindset is. And I think that really influences how you play.
Definitely. And I think if that quote isn't from someone else, you can quote it for yourself. So
True. Yeah.
make some
Yeah.
merch with that quote. But yeah,
Exactly.
I would. I mean, I haven't really. I used to play golf when I was 4, so I'm not really qualified. But I can tell you really need to just. It's all in the mind. Like you're planning and all that. That's what we're gonna get into with our discussion today. So prior to the golf match, what goes into the strategy? How do you plan for it?
Like, are you saying before I even play?
Yeah, so before you get onto the course, what are you thinking about in regards to maybe how the course is laid out, for example. Are you gonna create a strategy, like what
Oh
clubs?
yeah. So usually I play a practice round beforehand and then I like to make my own book that has all the holes with it. And then I just write my notes while I play, like where I want to hit the shot and strategize before. And that's pretty helpful. And I usually the green, we write like the slope and where it breaks and everything. Um, so yeah, I usually carry that around with me. But mainly since you can't really plan how you're gonna play, it's really just all in the spot,
Yeah.
just going with the flow.
Yeah, so that got me thinking, what if in your practice round it wasn't raining, but then it ends up raining during the game? How do
Oh
you
yeah, yeah, that is really tough. Yeah, usually, because it does end up changing how you're gonna play if it rains. Like you hit it shorter, and it's just mentally exhausting because then you know you're gonna be playing in the rain for the next couple of hours. But uh, like I've played a lot of golf, so now the rain doesn't really bother me as long as it doesn't thunderstorm, I guess. But
Yeah.
yeah,
So
or
yeah, and speaking of what are the worst conditions you've ever played in?
oh my God, this is actually a really good story. So, good question. Freshman year, this was at state. It starts snowing, and I remember my hands were freezing, and I don't really like to wear layers when I play. So, I would like take my jacket off every time I swing. And I remember this one shot so vividly. I couldn't like move my hands while I swung, and then after I swung, I just like dropped the club. It was really intense. I
Oh my
remember I was just like, I just can't wait to get this round over with and go inside and get some hot chocolate.
Oh my
But
God.
yeah, it was insane because for the boys golf team, they finished 18 holes in the snow and then they canceled it.
Wait, they finished their
Yeah, because it was like 50% of the guys finished and then they canceled it. So some of them didn't even tee off, but most of them finished and then they canceled it. I
That's
felt really bad for
horrible. What? That's unfair, man. But
yeah.
no, that sounds like a mental challenge. So, what's your mentality going into a match? What were you thinking? Not in terms of strategy, but just for yourself.
I'm usually trying to keep calm because I know it's not good to stress out. If you want to stress out, you don't want to do it before you even play. So I try to keep it lighthearted and easy beforehand. I usually eat some light snacks. I have some snacks with me out on the course so that I don't really get too stressed. I know when I was younger, I would like cry whenever I played bad, but thankfully I have grown past that. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's bound to happen. As kids, I used to play baseball and I would just if I remember I have you had a vivid story, I have one. my coach puts me in. It's a tie game. The base, no, we're down one. The bases are loaded. I hit it so hard right to the pitcher, and then the game ended. And it's like
No.
disheartening. So it's important to
Yeah.
develop that mentality of just like that growth mindset. So like, would you say that's something that you involve into your thinking as you're playing?
Oh, definitely. Like, if you play bad one hole, you still have like whatever 17 more holes to go. It doesn't your score doesn't depend on just that one hole, and you can learn from it. And I like to say minor setback, major comeback. So I like to think of it as like, when I come back, this will be a good story to tell.
Definitely. That's like there we go. That's another quote for Emily Duan.
Oh yeah,
Um,
two for two.
so you sort of already touched on this, but like what else is like what's going on in your head as you're playing? Are you trying to distract yourself like from the moment or are you in the moment? Like what's going on in the head?
It usually depends. I'm usually just thinking about my next shot, but sometimes when I get really anxious, I usually like to repeat a phrase. So when I was younger and I would get really nervous, I would just count how many steps it takes for me to get from my ball to the next shot.
Yeah.
Usually I would like lose track, but that was always a fun way to keep my nerves down. Yeah, but usually I'm just thinking about like a strategy, where to play next, and or I'm talking with my like teammates.
Mhm. So it seems like strategy is a big part of what goes into your thought process as you're playing. And
Yeah, I like keeping a routine.
that's a good one. That's what I've heard is just like it keeps you like in the moment present. You're not like overthinking because if you have that set routine, you know what's gonna come next.
Yeah, right.
And how is it with your teammates? So golf is technically a individual sport, but how do your teammates help? Or maybe like are they distractions sometimes, or is it primarily helpful?
Oh, at state was great. Some of our teammates from JV also drove 3 hours to come watch, which is insane. And like all the other teams are talking about how they wish they had like spectators like our team, because they were just cheering on every shot. And I think that definitely helped because I was in a better mood. I was like, oh, someone's rooting for me. It's nice to see someone's having my back. Yeah, we definitely have a big team camaraderie, which I wasn't familiar with before I went on high school because it's mainly just independent. But afterwards, I would know that like no matter what I shot, they would always be there.
That's good. I mean, so even in like an individual sport like golf, your team will still be a big support for you. That's good. And I know that Mr. Kaneen, he's the coach, right? So
Yeah,
how does he help in terms of not only strategy, but just like motivating you and keeping you in the game?
yeah. So the coaches, they usually go to set holes, and I like always look forward to seeing him on a hole. It's really interesting. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but he claps in code. But so I'm not giving it all, but not like to help me with golf or anything. So whenever I hit like a good shot, I wait for the his claps, which is really interesting.
That's a very Mr. Kaneen thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Him and his slow claps and AP
Oh
compared.
yes, yes.
But that's very interesting. So, and actually, like in terms of strategy, how do they help, like with their experience and not just strategy, but like motivation and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, the coaches definitely are a big part of I think why our team is so successful. So the head coach, Coach Deegan, she always talks about like having the golf team be a family, which I think was really important in our success because we know each other, we know our games,
Mhm.
and then like so we always hang out after practices and build that team bond, which I think is rare for most other teams. When I see them out there, they don't really have that we have, which I think is an advantage for us.
Definitely, because it just, as you said, keeps you going, knowing people have your back. But so I'm assuming it's not just high school golf for you, like golf outside of school. Is that like you don't really have that sense of team, like you don't have that team sense. So does that impact you while you're playing? Thinking about the
Yeah,
next
it is
process?
sometimes it gets kind of lonely just traveling around by yourself, but I think just knowing that everyone else is going through the same thing and meeting new people is always fun because you play with people from around the country.
Definitely. That's yeah, because you go to you've I remember you've been to like different states, right? To golf and
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So, in terms of like actually you on the course, how do you stay positive if like you've had a rough couple of first holes? You sort of touched on this with that phrase you
Yeah, yeah. Minor setback, major comeback. That's
yeah,
like my motto in life.
that's good. It's not just golf, but that definitely applies to life as well. Had a rough test, have a better comeback, you know.
Exactly.
Uh, so when you're on the course, how do you stay focused?
Usually I just think about where I want to hit my next shot, I think what it for me it helps for me to not focus on golf 100% out when I'm on the course. So between when I'm walking from my first shot to my next shot, I usually think about other things. But then when I get within like 10 yards of the ball, I start getting into that zone of like how far I am out, what the wind is like, and then just really planning my shot. So I think the key is to know that like you don't want to think, for me personally, I don't think about golf 24/7 because that's just going to stress me out more, especially if I had hit a bad shot. I don't want to dwell on it. So I don't want to worry about it until I need to.
That's because if you're thinking about it constantly too, you're just gonna burn out. That
Yeah,
happens
exactly.
about anything. Um, I don't know if you have, but have you encountered a serious injury before when it came to golf or no?
Oh my God. I wouldn't count this as a serious injury. I think it's more of a funny story. But so basically, in the winter, I practice at a golf dome, which is inside. I don't know if you've ever been to Buffalo Grove Golf
Yeah,
Dome,
yeah.
but it's like this big, huge white bubble, and there's like barriers between each person's bay. And I was sitting on the bay once, and they swung the club and hit me in the neck.
Oh
So
my God.
yeah, I mean, I didn't really get hurt, but I think that's a funny story.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you've known any teammates, but like if you had like a serious injury, how would you have overcome the because I know sports injuries, it's not just the physical aspect of like not being like physically fit to play, but mentally you're just like, I want to be on the course. Like, how would you go through that? Or if you've known someone that's gone through that, how did they get through it?
Oh yeah, actually, my friend who won state, she had a finger injury this past summer and she was out for a while. So that's a really great minor setback, major comeback story. But I know she was out for a couple months, and I've also known other people who've had like back injuries and or like they've had surgery. There was this one girl who was really interesting. She had a finger injury, but then she ended up going to Duke for golf.
Oh,
So I
wow.
think it's just a testament to how like they were able to come back from that and really come back better, I guess.
Definitely, because I mean she's going to Duke for golf.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive. But so speaking of like the sort of physical side, like at least like I know for basketball, for example, to get better at basketball, you're gonna get some shots up, you're gonna lift, stuff like that. But for golf, if you're saying it's more of a mental sport, how do you train yourself mentally to be like, as you said, composed on the course, stay focused? Does that come with age, or are there things you do like mindfulness practices or stuff like that to train your mind to be better for golf?
Yeah, last year I was really into mindfulness and meditating. I think it depends. For me, it's more like experience because I know like throughout my years of playing golf, it's better to just stay calm instead of letting your emotions get the best of you. And yeah, when I was little, I would cry and have like breakouts in the middle of golf. But I think that's just, I mean, it was a learning experience. I wouldn't change it. But now that I've gone through that, it's best to like take a deep breath, understand that, like, this is just a game in the end of the day, and your score doesn't define you, and just take it easy.
Definitely. Take it easy is something everyone should apply to their own lives, regardless
Yeah.
of golf. But so when you like said you practiced mindfulness and meditation like significantly, do you think that impacted your golf positively?
Yeah, I think so. I've been to notice like every little detail in the like in nature. I would hear like birds chirping. And it was really like I felt like elevated and calm.
There we go. I think that would help because it's just easier. It's like you don't stress about the next shot, like, oh, I have the next shot. It's just like, oh, there's the next shot and you're gonna
Exactly. Yeah.
do better. So to wrap up our conversation, is there any advice you would give out in terms of just staying mentally confident, having that self-belief within yourself.
I think knowing that in the end of the day, I think that everything happens for a reason, or you take everything with a learning experience and you can do it. That's another thing. You have to believe in yourself, because if not, then who else can believe in you?
And that's a great closing.
Another quote.
The third quote in the
Although I think that's already made up.
but that's fine. We can still attribute it to you. To conclude our discussion, thank you so much for being here today, Emily.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Of course. Next, we spoke with Julia Tehovnik, a sports psychology consultant from Chicago.
Thank you again for being here. First of all, it was so nice to see you actually, well, more or less in person, but just to get the ball rolling. I know that for me and a lot of other people as well, just the term sports psychology in general is kind of like a new thing. At least I've never really gotten too much exposure into it. So I was wondering, like, what's your definition of what it is exactly? If you can kind of summarize it in any way.
Yeah, so sports psychology is, I guess, psychology in a sports setting. More specifically, it's using mental skills to improve performance. And that could be sport performance or performance in so many different areas, which is what I use in my clinical work with clients who experience anxiety, depression, want to improve their lifestyle. So many different ways that those mental skills could be applied. And they are therapeutic techniques that are very helpful for clinical diagnoses. But if you apply it to sports and athletes and performance, how can it be used to help an athlete or a performer just elevate themselves and do what they do, but better? Or if they're experiencing a decline in performance, how do we get them back to the level that they want to be using those mental skills?
All right. So what exactly inspired you to specialize this in the first place?
Oh, well, I am a former NCAA athlete, Division III. Yeah, Division III lacrosse. I was a goalkeeper. And if you can imagine, being a goalie is pretty much a head game, more so than anything else. Yeah, so I actually experienced a lot of concussions from that role. Occupational hazard, play lacrosse, play goalie, you're gonna get hit in the head.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, concussions and traumatic brain injury has a lot of mental health concerns that are part of the symptoms and the long-term repercussions of that. Didn't really know that until way later that was the case. So I got into sports psychology and actually clinical counseling because of that. I wanted to specialize in injury recovery, and that turned into mental health and wellness and recovery from long-term disorders and diagnoses that we might just live with. So that's my background.
I mean, getting that firsthand experience and finding out about the repercussions later. I mean, it must have been quite inspiring, because I played baseball for a while, but then I stopped playing in high school. But I think going through the sport and understanding the importance of both physical and mental aspects of it is really crucial. So speaking about those mental aspects, how important do you think mentality and mindset is to sports like golf, which aren't the most physically demanding, but seem to have other aspects that are more crucial?
Oh, it's incredibly important. I think your word crucial sort of sums it up. There is absolutely the physical game, but there's the mental game, and that takes up a large portion of it. You can train all day, every day, as we used to say on my team, all day, every day, but you can only do so much with your physical talent and physical skills and capabilities if you don't have the motivation, the focus, the drive, the regulation. It's huge, especially for golf, like you're saying. It's incredibly important.
How do you think an athlete really develops that kind of mindset, though? Because I know you mentioned drive, mental toughness, all of this, but how do you kind of get into it? Because the physical aspect in comparison is kind of easier, but what do you do mentally to prepare for that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'd say it's intrinsic and extrinsic, internal and external. Part of it is a personal desire. If you value doing well, then you're going to value what you need to do to get to that point. Mm-hmm. And if you value mental health, and if you value your own health and happiness, then there's more likely you're going to value spending the time on mental skills training. But it's also external. Do the coaches encourage it? Do the trainers encourage it? Do the parents encourage it? Are we motivated externally by winning or getting the best score on the course? Or are we motivated by feeling like we accomplished something? And is that reinforced? Is it you didn't get a high score, so you did poorly? Or, hey, you did way better than last time. You did really well, even though you didn't place as well as you wanted to. So I think internally, externally, you've got to value it, and it's also got to be like reinforced and encouraged.
So speaking of that reinforcement and like encouragement, so we spoke to one of the most successful a girls golf player from our school before we spoke to you, and she had a very cool quote. She said, "Minor setback, major comeback." So self-talk like this, how do you get your athletes and the clients you work with to develop it, and how important is it to their success?
Specifically with my work with golfers, self-talk is critical. To go back to that word, it's kind of where everything starts. We can have negative thought patterns that just we get stuck in a loop. We call them negative thought spirals. And it just spirals like a tornado and can get out of control like a tornado. So when I work with athletes or even former athletes for their daily lives and regular lives outside of the sport, focusing on self-talk is reframing the thoughts, noticing the thoughts first and foremost. Mindfulness has to happen. You can't really solve or shift something unless you can recognize it and know when to do that. I really like that golfer's quote. That's wonderful and speaks to the positive self-talk too. In my work, I might seem bubbly and optimistic, and I like to put that out there, but life is not sunshine and rainbows. And if you are stuck on the ninth hole and you are just in a rut, yeah, that's an unfortunate situation. So positive self-talk for me is proactive. What are you doing? What can you do? What is possible? As opposed to negative self-talk, which is more of the absence, not really just pessimistic or negative in that sense. It's, well, you're not doing well. You are doing this and you're not doing it. It's okay. What do you need to do? What can you do? Proactive, positive. What move forward, moving really.
And I think it's very easy as I said, I played baseball. It's very easy to be like, oh, I didn't do this right. I didn't do that right. Versus that, I think it's also important to look at what you're doing well in a certain moment and building on that. How do you keep doing that rather than just saying how you can't do something and why you want to be better at that. Try and keep getting better at what you're already good at, because that will only help. This is a bit of a tangent. This is a question that just popped into my head, but the term athlete, so it can be applied to obviously professional athletes, but I'm assuming you work with like different people who might just be like part-time athletes or there. So do you want to expand on that and how different it is working with different sets of athletes?
Absolutely. There's former athletes, there is the weekend athletes, there's the daytime athletes, the non-competitive athletes, the competitive athletes, high school athletes, college athletes, professional athletes. It's really a mindset. And I think that's how I've been able to take my education and specialty. And although I don't work primarily with competitive athletes, I do work with every other type of athlete. And if you can imagine in a business setting, there's competition. While I'd like to think that the field of therapy and psychology, especially amongst my colleagues in my network, is collaborative, we are always sending referrals to each other. We are slightly competing, like we are putting ourselves out there on different websites and advertising our skills and talents and getting clients, as long as they're a good match for us. But there's still like that little bit of competition of who has a caseload, who doesn't. Now, granted, in my field, it's not as competitive, but still for all these other fields, marketing, you are competing for the customer's attention. You are competing for customers and any other business and attorneys and law. There's competition everywhere and there's performance everywhere. So if they're not physical athletes, I tend to work with the different types of athletes, and especially with former athletes, anyone who has, even little league experience. You have a good little league coach, their messages stick with you forever. High school athletes, college athletes, that mentality of you do what you're told, you follow leadership, you demonstrate sportsmanship, that can stay with us. Those are the formative years, even in little league, high school. All of those things are during our formative years. So those values and messages stay with us. And then how do we apply that in our adult lives in other things?
That's a very interesting point. I mean, again, I'm sorry, but I have another baseball story. But
Yeah.
I brought this up to my parents the other day. One of my coaches back when I think I was in like fourth grade would say that I was a very coachable person, and we're both seniors. We're working on college apps. I was thinking about that. I'm like, maybe that's something I want to highlight, that I have the ability to work with different professors. And so there are just some messages that you're right, it can just stick with a person and really be an influencing factor in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. And congratulations on being seniors. So even the unfortunate competitive sense that might exist for getting to college. The point is, like, I hope you go to school and do whatever it is that you want. Wherever you go, you'll get a degree. If you don't get a degree, you'll do something else. It doesn't have to be competitive. And yet I know there's that underlying sense of, ooh, it kind of is.
Yeah.
Competing with the other applicants, competing unintentionally with the other students. So
Yeah.
that's another example.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll come to an end though, right? And then hopefully by the end of all this, we get into good places and we're happy with our decisions. So there's always that to look forward to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, a question kind of going back to your area of expertise. I was wondering, like, are your approaches with these different kinds of athletes and stuff vastly different, or are they like at its core pretty similar? Like, what do you do to kind of help these people?
I try to keep it as personalized as possible based on the individual's need, because I mean, everyone's different. You both are different from each other. Even though you're seniors and both interviewing me, I can tell you have your differences just naturally. Everyone does. So one approach is not going to work for everybody. So I pull from a lot of different approaches with athletes, former athletes, and my clients that have that athletic mindset. There are differences based on their experience. I've also noticed there's differences based on individual sports and team sports. It might be subtle, but it's still noticeable. Even for me as a goalie in a team sport, there's a bit more personalization of, oh, it's my fault, or, oh, I have to do this. And with teams, it's, we need to do this, or I need to do this for the team so we can do this. It's a different type. Also their relationships with coaches and other competitors, like that makes a difference to how they relate to other people. How do they see their boss? How did they see their coach? Did they do what their coach said blindly so they weren't running laps? Are they doing what their boss says blindly so they don't get fired? But it does have difference. Like everyone has their differences in their learning styles and in their performance styles, in their needs. So it's hard to say that I take the same approach with everyone because it's all different based on what they need and what they're looking for.
And yeah, I mean, if you do you can't really take the same approach with everyone, because as you said, we're all different. We all have different experiences. So you got to take that as a factor. Speaking of former athletes, especially, and there might be like times in their careers where they like suffered from some injury or some personal matter. So if an athlete of yours is facing a tough, or like they go through a tough break, or they have like a rough experience, how do you get them through that? How do they get reinvigorated to get back to the athletic level that they were at before?
Oh, injury recovery. I love this. To translate that to a clinical experience too, it's like someone who experiences trauma. How do you help them get to a place where they can be faced with triggers and regulate themselves again? And the fact of it with an athlete is the injury happened. Even if we heal and go through all the physical therapy and the rehab and do all the mental skills training, the injuries still happen. So part of that is acceptance and knowing like how they were before the injury may never be how they become. They could become so much better, even better. And yet it's not going to be the same as it was before. And there is an acceptance process to that. It happened, it was unfortunate, and a processing piece of letting go of the player or the athlete they were beforehand to then create space for the athlete or the player that they can become. And it might be better, but it's going to be different. And if whatever better looks like we don't have to put too much pressure on to be better or as good, to just let different be. Whatever different ends up looking like. It could be, as an example, one year I had a concussion and I could not play goalie that year. My physicians would not allow it. I switched to defender. I was not good. I was still in the field. It was different. I was not better by any means. I was starting at a whole new position, but still in the field. It was different. And the value there is to get back on the field. So part of that reinvigorating process is what's important. Is health important? Is recovery important? Can we make those important for the time being? And then is it important for them to get back to where they were? Maybe we can reframe that of, can it be important to just get back to the sport in any capacity, and then important to work towards a goal? And then it doesn't have to be you get back to that performance. You get back to where you were beforehand. It's what else is important. For me, that was getting onto the field. That was wearing the jersey. That was being with my team. I could have done that from the sidelines. Absolutely could have done that from the sidelines, but I wanted to be on the field. So that was the new goal, the new value for other players and with injuries is just being mobile again. Part of it is just learning to write or do those other things important. How do we emphasize that and then do the small incremental goals to have those values met, whatever they end up being?
Very interesting. I think having those like small incremental goals, I like personally, if I have something I want to accomplish, breaking that into parts, like I want to get this done. Once you get that done, it gives you more motivation to go on to the next step. So I think
build on it.
that's a very good point. If I have one last question to ask, do you have any stories you have with former like golfers that you've worked with before, how it was working with them, and what are specific things related to the sport that you had to help them with?
Yeah, I have an experience working with a collegiate golfer, and as is very common with golfers, to be caught in the middle of the course, feeling stuck on a mistake that happened and not being able to let go of it. It's again with the injury recovery process, like it happened, the mistake happened. Like you can't get that hole back, you can't get that shot back. And rather than focusing on what happened and what you didn't do or the mistake of it, it happened. What's happening now? So I had mentioned before that mindfulness is really important. You can't really know how to shift your thoughts unless you know what you're thinking. You can't know when to implement these skills unless you're mindful of when something's happening where you need them. Part of that mindfulness is also in the moment mindfulness, presence, not hanging on to that last shot or that last hole, but what's this next hole look like? What does this shot look like? What am I doing right now? What can we do right now to make that shot happen? And for the experience with the collegiate golfer, it was reframing their thoughts away from the past goal by focusing in on their routine, on simplifying their routine. So instead of having to remember the 5 steps of, okay, step up to the ball, shift your weight, get your hands set, look at the hole, like notice the wind, think about that, line it up. Like that's so complicated. There are so many steps to that. So we use chunking of making it only 3 steps of line up, and then they do everything that's involved in that lineup, assess the shot, and doing everything that's in assessing the shot, and then preparation. And maybe that's multiple steps of taking a deep breath, doing their wind up, whatever that is, but simplifying and chunking it. So all they have to think about is those 3 things or those 4 things. And even though it's a whole process, it really is a whole process. There's so much that goes into lining up that one shot. I'm trying to make it simple so that when they are frustrated or upset from that last shot, they just redirect their thoughts to the present moment. And what's present is 3-step process, 4-step process, a very simple process to get them back to that next shot. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Totally. And how difficult is it really to work with people who kind of feel like they messed up once and then suddenly like everything is kind of messed up for them as well? Because I know from my own personal experience that when you make mistakes, sometimes that you looking back at it, if you had just done something just a little bit differently, you could have done so much better on whatever it might be, that it's really hard to look back on it and like kind of not focus on what you did wrong and instead kind of look at what you can do right in the future instead. So like, how difficult is it to work with people to change that mindset?
I think with athletes especially, it's hard because mistakes are seen as failure, and failure is noticeable. You fail when you lose. You don't really, but that's what we're conditioned to believe. Or you make a mistake and it was wrong. And if it's wrong, you run laps for it. And it's just part of the conditioning to like learn how to do things differently. So it is incredibly difficult to let go of those mistakes because we want to learn from them. We want to avoid them. And even from like a clinical standpoint, from an evolutionary perspective, we focus on the bad so we avoid it for survival. So to get out of that is incredibly difficult. Positive, proactive thinking, or even optimistic thinking, that is hard. Our brains are hardwired to focus on the negative so we avoid it. That was dangerous, that was risky, that was failure, that was not good. Let's not do that again. So it is difficult. It is just naturally more difficult to focus on those things. So with working with athletes, it's really focusing on that self-talk, but also the self-esteem. Can they accept failure? Can you accept failure? Like, is failure really absolute? Is it an actual failure? Or is it a mistake to be learned from? Of like, okay, don't do that again, do this instead. and then focusing on, all right, we're going to do this instead, as opposed to fixating on, I did this and I shouldn't have done it and I did it wrong. That's holding on to it. Can it be okay? Can it be acceptable? Is it something that's part of the learning process? And then at least you know not to do that the next time. What are you doing instead? How do you move forward? What is happening right now that you can do to make that happen?
All right.
It is hard. It's just naturally hard.
I mean, yeah, as
Yeah,
you
for
said, it's
sure.
like our natural ability to think negatively rather than positively, because that's what we do for survival. But in terms of sports, you need to have that positive mindset, and in life in general, not just sports. To
Yeah.
make mistakes positively is very important.
Yeah. Like
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Because I know
we're
even if it's not sports, like I've had moments with school or like a test or whatever it is where you mess up once and you're like, oh no, this defines, my progress going forward. So
Mhm.
definitely.
Oh, I should have known that. I should have known better. Like, okay, well, you know better now. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It happens.
That's all we have. Thank you so much, Julia. This was
Thank
a
you
very
so
positive
much.
discussion. With the amount of physical strength and endurance required to do well in sports, it's easy to forget about the emotional, psychological, and social aspects that contribute to success. Be it golf, cross country, or basketball, all athletes should know that our mentality can most certainly make or break our performances. After all, as writer David Adam once said, mind over matter represents the triumph of will over physical hindrance. With that being said, we would like to conclude this episode of Statesman Soundwave. We'd also like to send a big thank you to Julia Tehovnik and Emily Duan for taking the time to speak with us today. And we'll see you guys on the next episode of Statesman Soundwave.